Good afternoon. It does work. We can hear you all, and looking forward to one more panelist joining our mix here. My name is Drew Clark. I'm editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. I'm on vacation with my family, so I'm in a different location than normal, but I'm happy to be with each of you during this event today, Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. We are going to be talking about generative AI and the policy issues associated with that. While we are just waiting for our additional panelists to join us, I wanted to say a couple of words about both our topic and a couple upcoming events at Broadband Breakfast. We cover the politics and policy of technology and the internet at Broadband Breakfast. We do news and analysis every single day, and we also do a lot of events. We do these free weekly Broadband Breakfast live online events that we're participating in now. We also do in-person events. We just concluded an event called the Broadband Measurement Summit not long ago, and the videos of that event are available online to those who are Broadband Breakfast Club members. We also are doing some interesting upcoming events, including some that are both in person and online. Next week, we're going to be just online, talking about the promise of precision agriculture. But the week following, on April 10th, we're going to be both in person and online. We'll be in person at NCTA, the Internet and Television Association's headquarters, and live streaming, talking about achieving internet for all, addressing discrimination and rurality. And we have more exciting announcements for later in April coming up soon. So look for those and look for that discussion points. I also want to address, or I should say, I want to give a shout out and a thanks to the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. We could not do the reporting and the events that we do without the support that we have from them. While I'm waiting on doing that, I'm trying to address one additional technical glitch. Here we go. Our last panelist is live, so I'm so glad about that. But I wanted to give a shout out to the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. They include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, Comcast, Coos Systems, Ookla, Michael Baker and Associates, missing a couple of these, the Internet, the Institute for Local Self-Reliances, Community Broadband Networks Project, Wesco, SmartWave, and we're grateful to have each of these sponsors supporting our programs for Broadband Breakfast Live Online. I'm going to go ahead and change the view so that we've got all of our panelists here with us today. And today, again, our topic is generative AI and congressional action. I should say, or should note, that we're probably going to be able, or going to broaden it a little beyond just congressional action, because the National Telecommunications and Information Administration today released its accountability report, and that I'm certain will be a topic for discussion here. We reported on that, released that earlier this morning, and it calls for auditing of high-risk AI systems. What is high risk is not as clear, but the clear message is regulation is on the way. And so we're going to hear from our panelists talk about this from many perspectives. I'm going to give brief intros of each of them, and then they'll go in that order with some brief opening remarks, and then we'll broaden out to our discussion. And again, we encourage each of you to participate and to ask your questions. Ask your questions on Zoom, ask your questions in other forums, and even ask your questions on the page for this event. Those live kind of green comments and questions, just become a free member of the Broadband Breakfast community. That's free, and you get access to more content. And then, of course, we hope you'll also join the paid Broadband Breakfast Club, where you can get access to all of our content, all of our live streams, or I should say all of our videos of events and our exclusive reports. So let's now turn to our panel. They include Daniel Castro, who just joined us. He's the Vice President at the Information Technology Innovation Foundation and Director of ITIF's Center for Data Innovation. He writes and speaks on many issues related to tech and internet policy, and he was named to FedScoop's list of the top 25 most influential people under 40 in government and tech. And that was 10 years ago, so we won't necessarily hold him to the under 40 label right now. Following Daniel, we're going to hear from Ashwin Prabhakar. Ashwin is a policy analyst, also at ITIF, and he was previously a James Buchanan Fellow at George Mason University and has a master's in economics. And his research focuses primarily on policy of emerging technologies, examining issues surrounding AI governance and competition policy. So hopefully he will not repeat anything that Daniel says. And then following Ashwin, we're going to hear from Will Reinhardt, repeat guest, Broadband Breakfast Live Online. Thanks for being with us. Will is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and author of the Techne newsletter at The Dispatch. He previously served at the FCC's Broadband Deployment Committee and the Consumer Advocacy Committee, and he is currently on the program committee for the Technology Policy Research Conference. So that's blast from the past. Look forward to hearing more about that, Will, when we have a chance to catch up. Next will be Jonathan Arbel, who is the Silver Associate Professor of Law at the University of Alabama, co-director of the Center for Law and AI Risk. And he's the co-founder of Systemic Regulation of Artificial Intelligence. Boy, that sounds scary. No, I mean, it sounds interesting. And also Generative Interpretation, New York University Law Review. So Jonathan, we're so glad you're with us and able to give your perspective on this topic. Following Jonathan, we're going to hear from Chris Chambers Goodman, who is professor of law at Pepperdine Caruso School of Law, a member of the American Law Institute. She researches and writes on equal protection topics, including implicit bias, algorithmic bias, affirmative action, preferences, diversity, and racial privacy, as well as evidentiary issues. And your recent law review article, AI, Can You Hear Me?, addressed potential constitutional violations when government actors use AI technologies. I mean, we're definitely entering this brave new world here. So let's figure it out and get it right. And then our concluding panelist will be Ryan Long. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. He is an experienced tech and media attorney, and he is a Stanford Law School Center for Internet and Society non-residential fellow. Very, very important, prestigious center, the Center for Internet and Society. I believe Larry Lessig founded that. Again, look forward to your perspective on this. For more than 17 years, Ryan has been solving tricky intellectual property related issues for clients, including former Google privacy researcher Martin Sheldon, Dr. Martin Sheldon. And he has written for or has been interviewed by TechCrunch and many about the issues of early stage AI company valuation. Boy, what a wealth of expertise. Let's get right into it. Please keep your remarks to the time allotted so we can have plenty of time for discussion. The floor is yours, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Drew. It's great to be back. I'll keep it pretty short. I mean, I think original way I was thinking about this was we're going to be talking about, what Congress is doing with AI, and Congress has over 80 bills. I think almost 80 bills that they're looking at in this space. So it's a really wide range of issues. So I'll just talk about what I think they should be doing. I think the number one priority for Congress, for the administration, should be focused on increasing AI use. China just finished their 2 sessions, which is their big, political gathering. And when you look at what they did there, number one issue on their agenda was economic transformation, through digital modernization using AI. Across the board, what they want to do for the next year is use AI across every part of their economy, every sector, to increase productivity and grow their economy. That's the message that policymakers and lawmakers in the United States should also be focused on. Unfortunately, I'd say that's not what they're doing. Most are focused on AI risk. And so if you look at the vast majority of bills and the conversations in Washington, it's about how do we prevent bad things from going wrong with AI instead of how do we make sure good things happen. And so, if kind of putting on my prediction hat about what we're going to be seeing this year, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more on mitigating AI risk through, proposed regulation, including what we saw today with NTIA's proposal, where they were even talking about regulating AI systems before they come on the market. So not just, making sure that they're safe once they're out there, but this kind of preemptive regulation. I think we're going to see a lot of interest in, regulation and laws around deepfakes and misinformation in elections, this being an election year. I don't know that we're going to see Congress go anywhere on that, but I think we're certainly going to see state legislators move forward in that space. And then the last area that I think there's probably the biggest opportunity for movement is around what I call AI adjacent laws. So things like, national privacy legislation or laws addressing big tech, because I think there's still a lot of legislators and policymakers that look at AI and they just think this is social media, 2.0, 3.0, and they want to regulate it like that. So I think those are the three areas I look at.
Thank you. And thanks for being very, very concise. Ashwin, your turn. Go ahead.
Thanks, Drew, for having me here. And thanks, Daniel, for covering why AI adoption should be increased in the United States and worldwide. And my angle to the discussion would be more on how different companies or like competition in the marketplace is helping with adoption of AI, and how competition between market players are addressing many of the risks that the Congress and other regulators wants to regulate away. So when I cover like competition policy, I have to look at who are the different players in the market, what are the kind of innovations that they bring about in the market. And a common theme is that most of these companies are trying to address many of the issues, say, for instance, biases in models. So players, generative AI model makers have an incentive to reduce biases. Nobody wants to use a model that is like biased against certain groups of people. Similarly, with regards to trustworthiness, they have an incentive to reduce any mistakes that they could make. You don't want users to say like this model is like not trustworthy, making errors. So there's like a lot of incentives among market players to reduce whatever harms that generative AI creates. And so any question regarding regulation of AI from the Congress or other regulators needs to take into account, is this an improvement over the status quo that the market forces are creating? And are these regulations kind of like messing up with the price signals and market forces, the outcomes that market forces could have generated? And with regards to this, like the Biden executive order gets some of the things right. And one of the things is like asking different regulators who have more expertise in the fields to regulate things rather than say having a one-size-fits-all approach. And NIST AI framework is one of the positives that came out of this, because they take into consideration what are the kind of different viewpoints that industry stakeholders have. And it is voluntary rather than say strictly enforced. But on the other hand, it does leave room for other agencies to overregulate things in the market as well. And so finding a balance between those two would be important. And you need to also take into consideration that there are a lot of laws in place that kind of regulate things within the AI space as well. For instance, I cover a lot of AI and copyright issues. The copyright laws that we currently have could address many of the competition or like the copyright concerns that generative AI poses. So take into consideration what are the existing laws that we have and what are the kind of market forces that are like kind of addressing many of the market failures or like, the externalities that AI is creating. And then if there is a gap for like Congress or the regulators to come into play, then only should they kind of, have their own AI specific regulations or policies. That would be my take.
Great, thank you. We'll keep this moving because we've got so many perspectives to get. Will, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on where things are heading on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and thanks for the rest of the panelists to talk through these issues. I think they're obviously incredibly important, and there's a lot that's going on here. The two things that I really have been tracking and have been really interested in within the AI space, and there's a lot of different perspectives here that we'll get through, but two things that I've been primarily interested in and thinking about are the jurisdictional issues and really the state level issues and how the state interacts, with the federal government. So on the first part on jurisdictional issues, I read through the Artificial Intelligence Accountability Policy report that came out this morning that Drew had suggested, and it falls on the artificial intelligence executive order very clearly, but I think there's still a pretty large gap in understanding and how jurisdiction is actually going to work in this space. What's the kind of jurisdiction you have for audits and auditors, the disclosure and access? I still think that there's still a little bit of, I need to spend some more time with it, but it seems pretty clearly that the administration itself is not exactly sure how to root these policy prescriptions, which we'll see how that kind of shuffles out as things traverse. I assume there'll probably be something else that's a follow-up on all of this, and perhaps even some congressional action that comes from this policy report that tries to give them some of that authority, at least at a narrow level. So we can talk a little bit about that. But the other big element that I've been following are the 400+ state bills that are going on right now. And there's a lot that's going on in the states. But I think that there should be more attention just at the, for all folks who are involved, because, everyone is in a different state, that there is a potential for movement at the state level at a much greater likelihood than we would see at the federal level. Kind of assuming a lot of the federal level actions are kind of done for the year effectively, but I think that there's still a lot that states can and have been doing. A big thing that just happened is Tennessee passed the Elvis Act, the Ensuring Likeness, Voice, and Image Security Act, which tries to and disallows mimicking artist's voice without permission, and adds it into the general copyright conversation. So all this is to say is that I think that there's a lot of state level action that's going on right now that we should, and really everyone else in the AI accountability space and the regulatory space, should be very closely watching.
Thank you again. We are keeping so close to the time that we're going to have time to chew up. But anyway, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about how you came to this topic and the areas that you view as central right now.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I should maybe start at the outset by just outlining my general outlook, which is, I think the executive order and the anti-IA report that just came out, I think they are steps in the right direction. I think we can quibble about some of the details, but I think generally the administration is thinking about it in roughly the right way. And one of the important things to notice right now about this current moment that we live through is just the rate of progress. And if you love technology, and I'm completely in this camp, you just can't afford to take your eyes off of what's happening in this space. Every morning I wake up, check the archive, Hugging Face, the Discord channels, just to see what interesting new capabilities people have opened up by tinkering with AI systems over the last 24 hours. This is just a moment of scientific progress at a rate that is just breathtaking. And for precisely the same reasons why we're so at awe at the rise of capabilities, that I think we should also be extremely attentive to the sort of risk profile that comes with these very highly sophisticated systems, and therefore, as a corollary, why we need to regulate, why we might need to think about it systemically rather than as looking just the application of this very general technology. So it's clear the Center on Law and AI Risk, we take AI safety very seriously, and we consider that there are three broad categories of things that we should look out for. First, we should think about misuse, just thinking. And this is a point on which I think there is a very general consensus that as these models become more and more capable, more and more of utility, they can do more things, and they're broad in their application, people are going to misuse these models, and we see some instances of that already, for cyber warfare, hacking, to create, potentially develop or build pathogens, or think about ways to build bombs just using the stuff under your sink, your kitchen sink at home. And these are all possibilities for people to misuse this technology. And I think it's very important for the United States, for the safety of the people here and for our national strength, to make sure that this technology doesn't reach the hands of our adversaries. So we worry about the problem of misuse. We also worry about accidents. And these systems are extremely impressive in their capabilities, but they're also imperfect in many ways. Some of them are predictable. Some of them surprise us along the way. And we know from self-driving cars that when you have an AI system that has certain blind spots, it can actually harm people and sometimes lead to lethal accidents. And then finally, we have to worry also about the systems themselves, because right now, 2024 appears to be the year where we're going to have the ChatGPT moment, but for robotics. So there will be greater integration of general AI, or AI to sort of in the same sort of tradition of ChatGPT that can do many different things, integrated into robotic arms and other mechanical implements. So how do we make sure that we're not going to have the Domino's moment? And the Domino's moment, to those who remember, Domino's made the promise that their pizza is going to arrive within 30 minutes. And that led to a lot of human drivers realizing that maybe the best optimal way to make sure you reach your client's home within 30 minutes is to drive recklessly. And you know, if this is the one thing you care about your incentives, if they're misstructured in this way, that's going to lead to a lot of accidents. And we want to make sure that these systems that are going to be very, very efficient when we present them with goals, that they will pursue them in safe ways. All of that should lead us to think very carefully about regulation, not just wait for exposed, what we call legal academics exposed to the moment of accident, and then sort of trying to find who we can blame for the accident, but early on try to detect risk profiles, try to detect instances where maybe companies are not sharing with us all the risks that are inherent in their systems that they build and try to sell. And all of that calls for broad regulation, and I'm very happy with the general direction of the executive order.
All right, wonderful. Let's hear from Chris Goodman and keep this moving so we can get to our discussion here. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you. So I think there's basically 5 basic considerations on the national sort of spotlight. The first is economics, as Ashwin has kind of mentioned, profiling, which several of you have hinted about, disclosures to consumers and users. Fourth, the political process concerns that Daniel mentioned, and managing risk, which Daniel has already highlighted a bit as well. So first, on the economics aspect, I want to draw your attention to a report that was issued in California in November of 2022 in response to the governor's executive order regarding artificial intelligence. And what the governor wanted was a report that focuses on the economic benefits that result from the use of artificial intelligence technologies, and particularly generative AI. Now, that report also addressed some of the risks, but it really was to highlight the optimization of workloads and how the ways that it can enhance the economy. Also on the economic front, the $10 million a couple of weeks ago was given to the NIST to establish the U.S. AI Safety Institute. So I think that's another positive development in ways of looking at the government working with the private sector and to support rather than sort of hamper business interests. On the issue of profiling, many states are in the process of enacting AI regulations or statutes that would prevent or severely limit the use of artificial intelligence technologies for profiling in ways that impact economics, your health, personal preferences, interests, reliability, all these types of things. And that seems to be a bit of a perhaps troubling area for many, because that's almost all of what AI is used for in advertisement, in employment, and those sorts of things. It is categorizing people based on their group status. On the third issue, disclosures, many states are, again, in the process of enacting substantial privacy bills, very broad privacy protections, with a focus on the particular privacy concerns that the use of these generative AI technologies can impact. On the political process elections issue that one of my colleagues mentioned, Connecticut has proposed a bill, an act concerning AI, that would prohibit contracting for or distributing any deceptive media regarding political candidates in the 90 days leading up to an election or a primary election. And then finally, on the issue of risks, yeah, that seems to be the biggest focus, is managing the risks. And I think another thing that I'll just highlight my state, California, for doing is the report that I was just talking about really takes a look at the risk factors, the risk management framework that the NIST uses, but also recognizing that some risks are the same, whether you're using generative AI or any other type of AI. There are other risks that may be enhanced by the use of generative AI, and then there are new risks that don't come about except when generative AI is being deployed. So I think that's another consideration, a useful framework for Congress moving forward to think about making sure they make these distinctions, and also focusing on the good that can come of this as well as the concerns. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
No, wonderful. Thanks for giving us that framework that we can use to look at. All right, Ryan, take us home, give us your thoughts on this, and then we're going to open it up to a robust discussion. So, floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think I just have 3 quick points.
And by the way, we can't see your face, so just to kind of there we go. That's a little better.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So just 3 quick points so we can get to the discussion. One is, I think there's a difference between traditional AI and generative AI, and I think that's important to keep in mind as a big picture. Traditional AI is like, I have a sentence and I want to translate it, or I want things done. I want AI applied to something and something done to it. Generative is actually creating content, like ChatGPT is generative. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as a big picture in terms of the types of AI we're talking about. And then 2, you have the bear versus the bull. And I think there's a difference between basically substitution and supplementing. So substituting my labor with AI as opposed to supplementing it. And I think that there's a difference in the way that this can affect the labor market. So there's substitution costs. When you use AI to substitute something, there's substitution costs, including disinformation. When I have a conversation with Daniel in person, it's easy for us to communicate in a way that we're not going to have any intervention. Whereas if we're online and we're having a bunch of people speak, there's more ways for that communication stream to be hacked. There is a labor replacement rate issue regarding substitution, regarding AI, when you use AI in lieu of human labor. Then there's a creativity cost. So when people are using AI, generative AI, to create things, as opposed to their own hands and mind, there's a creativity cost. So I think these should be taken into account when thinking about these issues as a bigger umbrella. And then regulation, you have benign uses, including translation, summarizing information. I want a speech summarized. I use AI to help me summarize it. Then there's inherently dangerous applications, which are in the medical context, like using AI to look at breast cancer, to understand breast cancer. That is more dangerous than just summarizing information. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think it's important to have some kind of like simple understanding of the technology, because in my experience, when people misunderstand the technology and the types of the applications of the technology, you get all these types of ramifications that are kind of overblown because people don't understand the differences in application of the technology and the types of technology we're talking about. So there's different types of AI and there's different applications. So I think these 3 things are kind of like good kind of ideas to keep in mind when talking about these complex issues.
No, that's awesome. And I want to ask you a question just immediately following Ryan, but in the urge to get going, I did neglect to mention several of our sponsors, and I want to thank our sponsors who I didn't mention yet. They include Google Fiber, Broadband Toolkit, Broadband Now, WISPA, Broadband Without Boundaries, Comcast, and the California Emerging Technology Fund. Several of you have mentioned California, have mentioned the executive order that Governor Newsom did in 2022. Love to kind of talk more about that. Reminds me that we're going to be in California on June 5th and 6th for the California Broadband Summit at Cal Matters Ideas Festival in Sacramento. So hopefully that will be on some of your radar screens. So my question for you, Ryan, is generative AI versus AI generally. And I appreciate that kind of content creation versus, doing something to something. Is there a fundamental policy difference between the way we treat generative AI versus non-generative AI, Ryan?
I mean, I think so. I think it's like using a gun to shoot in the air to keep coyotes away, as opposed to using a gun for some other purpose that isn't just that functional, application. So yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind these applications and how generative AI, ChatGPT, is actually like there's instances of kids writing their essays at schools using this. It's one thing to use. So the bull is, substituting everything, automating everything with AI. There's a difference between AI, by the way, and automation. So that's also to keep in mind. But the bull is let's use AI. China's using AI. Let's go. Well, there's cost to using AI. There's cost to what China's doing. The more you have interactions between people using these technologies, the more disinformation there can be, the more misinformation, the more hacking. Whereas, if I speak to you, Drew, directly, as I said earlier, we have a conversation in person, it's hard to hack that conversation. People can come in and say things. So in answer to your question, yes, I think it's very important to keep these things in mind, because when you generate information, and I'm not generating it myself, that's one thing. If I have something that I want done, like summarizing an article here by the Wall Street Journal, and I use AI to do that, that's more of it's supplementing my use. It's not substituting my understanding of things.
Well, let's do a kind of a quick check of our panel. So on this framework of bull to bear, okay, which Ryan's given us, and you referenced Daniel's remarks earlier about kind of China just going bullish, if you will. So where do you stand? Daniel, I guess you've already laid it out, but do you have anything you'd like to add? And I'd love to kind of hear from others, where do you kind of rate yourself on this willingness to push faster? I guess the term in Silicon Valley is accelerationist versus decelerationist. So where do you stand on that spectrum? Let's just do in the order we spoke, Daniel.
Sure. Yeah. Great question. I mean, a couple of things. So, I mean, I think one point to your point about, is there a difference here? I think it's important to recognize that there is a difference in terms of, speech versus decisions. And we have certain, free speech rights that are implicated with generative AI that maybe aren't implicated in other types of AI. But it's also, it is this intermediary between how we understand things, how we interpret, discover, predict. And so there's a lot of overlapping, equities that we have to consider in this space. And kind of going further, the reason I say, I'm definitely on the accelerate side, but I want to respond to one of Jonathan's points about incentives. The reason I disagree with some of the regulatory proposals here is because I think we're focused on the wrong incentives. So take worker safety, just real briefly. One path in this area would be to say, let's focus on, AI standards to make sure that, any automation in a warehouse, any robots we use, that we regulate to make sure that technology is safe. And another way is to focus on worker safety metrics and ensure that workers are safe. And those lead to two very different outcomes. In the first case, you would be making regulations that might make it harder to deploy AI, even when you're using robots to be a substitute for workers doing dangerous things. In the latter case, you have this incentive to adopt AI. Because it's, if there's cases where AI is making it safer for workers, then you have the strong incentive to adopt it, because what you're being judged on is, the ultimate performance. And so when I say accelerate, and the reason I want to use this example is because when I talk about accelerate, it's not don't regulate. The point is, where are we putting the regulation? We're putting the regulation on AI itself that's often holding back the technology. If we're putting regulation on something else, again, performance, worker safety, all these other areas that we can focus on, actual outcomes, right? Then we can see acceleration that meets these performance standards. We can have acceleration around AI to actually deliver the kind of results we want. And so, again, I really like this framing. I say accelerate, but that doesn't mean don't regulate. It just means don't regulate necessarily AI.
Briefly, any who also want to weigh in on this? Oswin, Will, Chris, Jonathan, Chris.
Maybe I'll jump in.
Please go for it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think Daniel's making a good point that AI can be dangerous to workers in factories, and you can have an AI system that is dangerous to the workers. And one way to deal with that is to say, if you have implemented an AI system that harmed, endangered a worker, then you should be held liable. Of course, there is the question of who's you in this question, and there are actually interesting conversations right now about who should be liable for accidents created by robots. So you can imagine that the factory owner, the one who owns the capital directly, will be responsible. You can also assign responsibility to the software developer or more upstream. And there are interesting conversations about where liability should be placed, and there are questions about optimal incentives and so on and so forth. There are reasons still why we want to regulate AI at an early pre-market stage, and that is because we just don't know the scope of all of its capabilities. There are many things we still discover every day that AI can do, like the existing models, not even the ones that are forthcoming, which who knows what they'll be able to do. And so they're saying if there will be catastrophic harm, it's not going to be especially easy to go after the people who are liable. It's not guaranteed that they will be able to pay for the accidents they cause. It's not clear that they'll be able to remediate them. And we have many sectors of the economy where we say, well, if there is imminent danger, we're going to require some pre-market clearance, like medical devices, for example. We want to make sure that before we deploy them, that they're actually safe.
Okay.
Yeah, and can I pick up on this real quick? I mean, because Drew, you mentioned this idea of effective accelerationists and just this notion that exists, I think, within Silicon Valley of trying to accelerate AI adoption and use. And just to put a little bit of a bit of explainer, I think there is this difference that's going on, or at least there is this distance rather in Silicon Valley between what they think is going to happen in the next 5 years with the complete takeover of all jobs by robots and automation, which I think is generally the notion of effective accelerationists, right? That you're going to see in a very, very near term a lot of disruption, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a difference between that and what Daniel is talking about, which is that in practice, it takes a long time for these sorts of technologies to actually get embedded and practically used by companies and by firms, right? And that entire process usually takes about 20 years. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that when you hear these bold proclamations that things are going to absolutely change tomorrow, obviously there's a lot of new things, new interesting things that are coming out. But it's still going to take firms and people time to adjust to all of these new technologies and new capabilities. And I think that people should realize that that sort of process isn't going to be quick. And I don't think it's going to happen in the way that folks in Silicon Valley have really been suggesting.
If I can jump in. Oh,
go ahead, please, Chris, do.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I mean, we go back to the Silicon Valley mentality of move fast and break things, right? But now we're at the point where things are actually broken and there's a problem. So my concern is acceleration without guardrails, acceleration without training, acceleration without substantive knowledge about what the capabilities are and are not is perhaps is more dangerous than innovative.
Now, whether you are an accelerationist or a decelerationist, what is the landscape of ability to change? So like if we posit three things, the Biden administration, what they're doing with the executive order, Will, thanks for discussing the report that just came out on AI accountability. If that's one thing that could, quote, slow it down, if you're an accelerationist, what about policy? What about laws? Okay, and there's been a reference to state laws, which sometimes can be just a bit of background noise, because the federal government can always come in, preempt any state laws whenever it chooses. If they were pesky enough, the feds would do something about it. And that's generally what happens when there's state laws and they come in and they do a big federal law that, privacy law. So what's going on in Congress, and what is Chuck Schumer doing? Does anyone know, right? And what are your thoughts on, again, the administration, Congress, and I want to raise a third, which is Europe, the European Union, and the ideas we're seeing in this administration implement, like the lawsuit against Apple this week. These came from Europe. These ideas were, germinated by European regulators and so forth. And what are they doing with? And will that kind of slow down American? And I don't mean to be so pro-accelerationist in this question. I'm just trying to use that as a frame for what are the things that could stop, slow down, curtail, protect us against AI harms. Please, again, let's hear from Jonathan and Ryan on this first.
Ryan, maybe?
Jonathan, you were first, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, I think Professor Goodman is absolutely correct here. I think that we need to think about not just innovation per se, not to think that innovation is always sort of an unmitigated good. We want to have the good kind of innovation. We don't want the bad kind of innovation. And this is what we need to be thinking about. There are different philosophies of regulation right now that we're seeing evolving. And I guess the background to all of that is that there is, and we all need to admit it, uncertainty about the future, deep uncertainty. That is, we don't know what we don't know where we're headed. We don't know the pace of progress, whether it will accelerate, remain equal, maybe it will hit a wall. There are many speculations and many good arguments in each direction. So right now we're facing uncertainty about the future of this technology, about its capabilities, about its potential harms and dangers. There are just question marks all around. And what I like about the executive order is that it does what I think is quite sensible to do when you don't know what's going on, is to set up procedures and infrastructure to figure out with stakeholders, with think tanks, with various civil society organizations, to hear what are the different perspectives, what's coming up, how should we prepare. The NTIA report talks about how are we going to audit, what are you looking for? And we don't have a good answer for what the audit will actually do. I'm in favor of audits, checking to make sure that when you're training a very sophisticated model, there will be some supervision that the model is not going to cause widespread harm. But what is the thing you're actually testing is not yet developed. So right now we're in the United States, the sort of stage of creating infrastructure for regulation. And one metric we use here, and that's sort of controversial, is the compute, how much computing resources go into training model. And the notion is that if you have a small consumer level model, that's fine. But if you have a big one, then you at least have to report that to the government. The big one is on the order of $100 million cost of training. The European Union has a broader, in some ways, very different approach. They talk about risk categories, but the definition of risk is kind of different from the definition of risk of safety, that is protecting the lives of individuals. It's more focused on consumer protection, more concerned with ethical risks, copyright, these sort of things. And that's good, but a very different conversation to be had. So this is a few introductory words about the two different philosophies.
Ryan.
Yeah, so just to go back to the bear and the bull, the EU, the last time I checked, has a rule regarding copyright. So that basically, in patents, so that you can't have AI own and create a patent. There has to be, it can be used to supplement your creative process, but if it substitutes it and becomes the sole creator of what you're doing, then you can't, in the EU, last time I checked, own that. It cannot be the author. So that's the general rule in the EU, and that's basically a bullish approach to this. The bearish approach. Excuse me, it's a bearish approach. So the bullish approach is what I think is what Daniel is advocating, which is well, let AI be the author, like substitute, instead of having a person write this stuff, just have AI write it. It's happening in China, and this is an argument I saw at this Yale presentation regarding this. Like, let it happen, let AI be the author, and AI can just create poems and different things. So I think these things are kind of important to think about as to the consequences of automating and having AI do things in the creative realm. It's not a costless enterprise. And the way the EU approached it, the last time I checked, was a more bearish approach, which is use it to supplement what you're doing, don't use it to substitute. And I think these are important issues. And I think it's also important, the context. Like, do you want AI doing your legal work? Like, if you get, Drew, you get sued for, your company gets sued for $1 billion. Do you want to go to an AI lawyer and, get your advice? Like, do you want AI being your doctor? Like, if I'm looking for a t-shirt online and I use an algorithm to help me find American Apparel t-shirts at a discount price, whatever, it's $9 a pop. Like, okay, that's great. But if I'm talking about like cancer or, different, more serious applications, do you want a human in the loop? Do you want just complete automation? So these are considerations. In the creative realm, the EU takes a more bearish approach, I think, and not the bullish approach. So I think these are important considerations to think about when approaching this complex issue, and just kind of like having one approach for everything, automate everything, have AI do everything, in my view, is not, my humble opinion, is not the wise approach.
Certainly want to get other thoughts in. Will, I'd love your thoughts on this, but we also want to get to questions too. We got some good ones here. Unless you have a burning reaction, I'll ask this question that Jim Mercanti asks. He says he does a lot of work in affordable housing. Having a common set of zoning codes and ordinances that apply in all situations is unrealistic, hence the term spot zoning. Is this same concept of zoning for a particular need or issue going to be appropriate in AI regulation? Certain AI for telemedicine, others for legal, governance, etc. Who would like to tackle this question?
I could jump in just briefly. I mean, I think it raises a good point and something we need to think about, which is that, when we're talking about AI and even the US regulation and state regulation, what we're talking about is layers and layers of regulation. I mean, there's only so many companies out there that are making these technologies, especially the ones that are widely used. They're facing regulations, yes, from the EU, potentially from the United States, from Canada, from Japan, from India, from South Korea. Like, there are a lot of countries out there that are looking into regulating AI, and they're all looking to do very similar things, but in slightly different ways, which means it becomes very hard for companies to comply. I mean, we think about some of these companies as these kind of behemoths, but when you look at even something like OpenAI, they're not that large, and they don't have a legal team that is sizable enough to deal with regulations in all of these countries. So when you're asking kind of the question of what might hold it back, it's not just regulation, it's the multitude of duplicative regulations that could be out there that I think poses a substantial problem. And that's for even a larger company. I mean, you look at something like Mistral in France, I mean, much smaller company, they certainly don't have the capacity to do that. You look at, Cohere or some of these other ones, they're just not of the size to do that. And so, at the same time that we have a lot of policymakers concerned about the size of tech, they're creating policies that make it so only large tech companies can thrive in this new environment. So I think that's one issue. The second issue I'll just throw out is that, there are trade-offs in this question about, where do we regulate and how do we regulate? For example, this idea of keeping humans in the loop, that costs money. And, the trade-off there is that, maybe we have AI that's a little bit more trusted or safer in a healthcare application. It also means fewer people have access to this healthcare application that, maybe they would have received treatment. And so there's a lot of kind of opportunity costs that I think is hidden when we talk about regulation. We're so focused on how do we make sure that, the self-driving car doesn't have an accident, that we lose sight of the fact that, maybe we could have saved 10,000, 20,000 people by having greater deployment of autonomous vehicles, even if we had some very high visibility accidents out there as well.
Chris, what would be your response to that argument, Chris?
Yeah, so on the issue of like spot zoning, I think one thing to take into account is the risks that are associated with the particular use of AI and in the particular field that it's in. If it's a high risk use, then it should be subject to additional safeguards, guardrails, as I mentioned before. If it's something that's very low risk, it's helping me decide what restaurant to pick for a meal or something like that. Well, then it doesn't need the same sort of safeguards. But I think the other thing that we can learn from the European Union and some work in the UK is this notion of what is the point of the AI? Why is it being used? Is it being used to make a final decision? Well, if it's a final decision about something that's important to an individual, like benefits or healthcare or something like that, they have the right to know in the EU that the decision is being made by artificial intelligence. That's one way to look at it. Is it just an aid to a human? So if we have the humans in the loop, then that there's a level of disclosure that would be necessary, but not quite the same level of disclosure as if it's a final decision. Is the artificial intelligence just making a prediction that someone is free to use or not use? In which case, again, we may need a lower level of regulation. But in terms of, getting back to your question about what we can learn from the EU, the UK, and other places, the United States is very far behind the curve. They've had a framework over here for the high risk, low risk, medium risk, as well as paying attention to the human dignity aspects that some of you have hinted at when we talk about the impact on individuals.
Will, what do you think about Europe's AI Act and whether that's a good model to follow? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm kind of skeptical of the European model here, specifically their AI Act, primarily because I think what we're hinting around is there's still a lot of, and as Daniel suggested, there's a lot of regulatory structures. There's tort law, there's copyright, there is state level regulation. There's a whole bunch of things that are probably going to interact with these automated AI systems and generative AI systems, right? Just broadly speaking. And I think what's interesting is, is one of the questions was specifically about spot zoning. My understanding of spot zoning, I once played an urban economist, no longer, was that a single area or a single piece of a land, right, or a single parcel is basically classified in a different way than everything around it is classified, which is this notion, from my understanding, this notion of spot zoning. And my sense is that's probably not going to happen within the AI space. That when we're talking about tort law, you're probably going to have some sort of development of standards or something that's going on there, with, as is the case also with copyright, and as the case with all of these kind of other instances, privacy law, et cetera, right? Such that we're basically going to have kind of a bottom-up development of regulatory systems in absence of a massive change at the congressional level that unifies all this in some sort of like statutory bill. But so I guess that's all right. My long-winded way of saying that I don't think that spot zoning is the exact right way of thinking about this. And maybe probably there's better metaphors to think about this, but I think that what we're likely to see is something that's actually very complex and very layered, which is going to give consumers protection. And agencies are going to go after the bad actors. You're going to have the FTC going after folks who are doing harmful things to consumers. So I think that there's a lot of different things that are happening all at the same time that are going to give consumers protection in absence of all of these other sorts of laws.
I want to make sure to get Ashwin into this discussion. Let me do so by asking about copyright and its role, because it seems to me that the one industry that really pushed back as the internet started to put lots of bad stuff out there was the copyright industries with DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act notices, right? And so, like, for example, an anonymous attendee asked this question: if social media is impacted by AI tools, and in the spirit of do no harm, can any panelist comment on the report of the Surgeon General and the tipping point on happiness among young people? And we're kind of in this moment where there's lots of hand-wringing over social media and how badly the US or the world kind of messed up in letting social media kind of be free form and out there. Is copyright the counterexample where there was a lot of pushback and therefore there is not the copyright problems that there are social media? Or do you disagree, Ashwin, and think that there's a lot of copyright infringement, and are we now going to see it more through AI? Could you speak to those issues, Ashwin, and then I'd love other panelists' thoughts too.
I would say when it comes to copyright issues, there are two sides of the coin. One is there like copyright violation during the training of models? And with regards to like, should AI have copyright over content generated by AI? So right now, when it comes to generative AI and the content that it outputs, the user or the person who kind of like wrote a model to generate the outputs do have the copyright over those things. Ryan was like talking about that's a case of like, Europe being less bullish, whatever. But I think the major thing is like, production is always for consumption. And when you use generative AI to create things, humans are like an important aspects of that. Like, we are trying to generate more value to more people. And so in that sense, like AI is not really going to be fully going to substitute. It's more of a complement in many regards. And to the other side of like, is AI infringing on copyrights when it trains on copyright material? So right now, there's a lot of discussion because of the New York Times copyright lawsuit against OpenAI. And one of the things is like, there's a lot of training material that's involved. It's not just New York Times. So one article might have like very little impact on what is output generated by OpenAI or like ChatGPT model. When I ask it to like, schedule, I have like XYZ in my fridge, what should I make with that? It's not really using like, New York Times articles on issues, international relations issues. It's a lot more that goes into that. And when it comes to like discussions on social media, I think it's like a very politicized issue with it's like, Kids Safety Online Act and things like that.
Right.
I think
we'll have to
there's
handle
like, we don't have like research to confirm that it is exactly social media use that is leading to children's like bad mental health state. And we are also like increasingly more aware of mental health issues. And so that could also lead to like, more diagnosis as well. So it's like not a clear cut case of like harm being built by social media.
Ryan, I'd love your perspective on the kind of the social media perspective and the copyright question, and whether those are potential stoppers for AI progress, to put it in that frame. Maybe guardrails would be a better way to put it.
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about interaction and communication. Social media is not a substitute for in-person communication. I mean, there's been numerous studies. I saw a presentation at Stanford. There was a psychiatrist that spoke about the negative effects of social media and, on cognition and on the way we operate. So I don't think it's, really that revolutionary to say that. And AI, speaking with a bot online regarding whatever it is different than going to your doctor or a lawyer or whoever it is and speaking in person. So there's cost to these. There's cost to being this bullish with this technology. It's not a costless enterprise. And anybody that says, just automate everything, use AI for everything, like, to me, they're not, with all due respect, are not thinking about these costs on the health. And regarding copyright, it's much easier now. Before, if I wanted to rip off a tape, I had to play it on one machine and then have another machine record it. It was much harder to basically pirate. Now, online, it's much easier to pirate, especially with AI. You can use bots to steal things and everything. So at the same time, it's easy to track things. There's metadata ways to track information. So, the rate of like whether or not at the end of the day, whether or not there's more piracy now than before, I don't know the answer to that. But certainly it's easier to steal things from the copyright perspective now than before.
Well, our time has flown by, and we have very little of it, but I want to give everyone a chance to have a last word, if you will. So let's just go in the same order we started. What are the takeaways from the perspective of AI regulation? Generative AI, of course, is the focus that we've talked about, but what do you see coming down the pike in the next 3, 6, 12 months? Daniel.
Yeah, I'll make 2 quick points. One, there's this huge focus on auditing, but I think we should remain very skeptical of auditing. To me, it's like, hiring a new employee. Will they be good or bad at the outset? You don't know. It'd be great to know. You wish you could audit that employee, but there's just, so many infinite permutations of this. You can't know at the outset, and I don't think auditing works. The second, I think we keep going back to move fast and break things. I think we all agree that's the wrong approach. We don't want to see that again, but that doesn't mean we can't move fast and build things. That's what China is doing. That's what the United States should be doing as well.
Oswin.
One of the major takeaways I had from the discussion is like different people have different concerns with regards to the benefits of AI and the cost of AI. I think like you need to like take I look at both of the consideration on the margins, is it like more beneficial or is it more costly? And the decision should be made on the margins rather than say inflated concerns about theoretical risk of AI.
Okay, Will.
Focus on the states, watch what's happening at your state legislature. Most of the state legislatures are coming to a close at the end of March or beginning of next month. If that's not the case, then most of them end kind of at the very beginning of like June or so. So watch the states, watch what's going on there, because I think there might be still a lot of action happening.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I found this discussion very, very helpful. It's just the beginning of the discussion. I think a careful approach to audits is indeed advisable. I think Daniel's metaphor is actually useful. We don't think interviews are the best screener, but they're better than nothing. And it's better to interview an employee before hiring them, especially for a sensitive position. One thing I see on the horizon is very broad pressure to regulate. It will come from many different reasons. Some protection of interests, some employee pressure. We're going to see pressure across the board. And if we want to avoid too much complexity, it's better to see regulation at the federal level, which I applaud.
Chris.
Yeah, I agree with many of my colleagues. I think it's unlikely that Congress is going to actually enact something in this election year, and therefore the state legislatures will be kind of filling that void with the patchwork that will make it difficult for companies and for corporations. And I think the other thing that's going to be on the rise is what New York City has recently enacted, the algorithmic impact assessment requirement. That is something that is across the globe as well. And so I think we'll see a rise in regulations, or at least conversations about the efficacies of these assessments. Some are independent and required to be independent. Others are just do it yourself. Tell us if you think it's, how it's working. So there's going to be a big range of effectiveness on that front as well.
Thank you. Ryan, you get the last word here.
I think there's going to be a greater understanding of the limits of these technologies and the benefits in the coming months. I saw an article, I think it was UC Davis or a local school here in California, that started having tests, exams with oral exams. You have to do your dissertation and go and actually present to your professor without any technology, so that the professor can say, okay, you understand the material, you've done your homework. And I think people are going to start seeing the limits of these technologies and the negative effects on cognition and originality. I know China's doing what they're doing, but there are costs to that. And I think some of this stuff, what we're seeing now, are people seeing these costs here in California, at least. And I think the next year, I think people are going to start seeing some of these things and saying, okay, AI is good for this, but not for that. And kind of having a more nuanced approach to this, as opposed to like one or the other.
Well, once again, our time has flown by. I want to remind everyone that you can always find all of the future events as well as recordings of past events at the URL I just put out there, broadbandbreakfast.com/tag/broadbandlive. Other short codes will get you there, /BBLO will get you there. Don't miss our discussion next Wednesday on precision agriculture and the promise of that. And actually, the day before, we'll have a webinar with our partner SmartWave on public-private broadband partnerships. That'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern time. On behalf of each of our panelists, Daniel Castro, Ashwin Prabhakar, Will Reinhardt, Jonathan Arbel, Chris Goodman, and Ryan Long, I want to thank each of them, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.